Welcome. This week we're taking a deep dive into quite a paradox, wouldn't you say? A historic peace agreement emerging after 2 long years of conflict in the Middle East, only to see that very peace begin to unravel within days.
Indeed. And we have a significant amount of source material to sift through reports from global outlets like The Guardian, OANN, Israel's Mariv, analysis from First Post, and, importantly, real-time social media sentiment captured by Stylo News.
Our mission today, then, is to analyze this intelligence brief and bring you the core elements. What precisely happened over the past week or so, why it's significant, and where this delicate diplomatic situation might be heading.
And it's worth noting, this synthesis comes to us through Stylo News, an AI-powered platform actually developed by retired intelligence professionals designed for exactly this kind of multi-source analysis and decision support.
Before we delve into the timeline, though, a quick acknowledgement of our sponsor, ProWave AI. They're leaders in providing custom AI solutions for both enterprise and government needs.
Thank you, ProWave AI. All right, let's begin with the initial breakthrough. That foundation, which for a brief moment in mid-October 2025 offered a glimmer of hope. This ceasefire stemmed from phase one of a comprehensive U.S.-led 20-point peace plan.
And this came after 2 full years of conflict, so the context here is crucial. The stakes were incredibly high. The initial terms themselves were quite significant, the release of 48 hostages, is that right?
That was the initial number discussed, yes.
Yeah.
Though reports indicated perhaps only 20 were believed to still be alive at that point. And this was in exchange for 250 Palestinian prisoners.
That's a major exchange, a significant gesture from both sides, potentially.
And we saw a movement relatively quickly, which seemed to underscore the seriousness of this initial phase. On October 13th, Hamas did release 7 hostages.
Okay.
And later reports confirmed that eventually all living Israeli hostages were released, alongside nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, a much larger number than initially announced for the prisoner side.
A truly seismic shift, then, in terms of the numbers involved. That must have altered the security calculus quite dramatically.
Absolutely. And while these exchanges were unfolding, parallel efforts are underway to build the diplomatic framework for what came next.
Which brings us to the peace summit in Egypt. Was this running concurrently with the releases?
Yes, it was very much a coordinated push. On that very same day, October 13th, you had over 20 world leaders gathering in Sharm el-Sheikh, co-chaired by U.S. President Donald Trump and Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi.
Now, what's perhaps most telling about this summit, looking back through the sources, is who wasn't in the room.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu declined to attend, and Hamas representatives also stayed away.
That sends a powerful message, doesn't it? The international community might be ready to move forward, but the primary parties involved remain, shall we say, cautious or perhaps deeply skeptical.
Skeptical is a good word. Despite those notable absences, the summit did achieve something concrete. It established the mechanism intended to anchor the peace plan long-term, an International Peace Council.
And its mandate.
A significant one. Overseeing Gaza's reconstruction, a monumental task in itself, and also guiding the political transition there. The plan was for this council to become operational later in 2025.
A huge undertaking, essentially asking a diplomatic body to manage both rebuilding and, well, state building in a very complex environment. But even before this council could really get started, the ceasefire proved fragile.
Extremely fragile. The breach happened quickly. On October 19th, reports emerged of an attack by Palestinian militants near Rafah.
Targeting Israeli forces, correct?
Yes. Tragically, 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in that attack and others were wounded.
And the Israeli response?
Swift and extensive. The IDF resumed major airstrikes across Gaza. The reports indicate over 120 sites believed to be linked to Hamas were targeted.
With significant casualties resulting from those strikes.
Yes. Reports cited at least 42 fatalities on the Gaza side. And, critically, the Rafah crossing vital for humanitarian aid was temporarily closed down amidst the strikes.
Now, Hamas's position here is interesting. Did they claim responsibility for the Rafah attack?
No. Quite the opposite. They publicly denied involvement in that specific incident, even while, somewhat paradoxically, reaffirming their commitment to the overall ceasefire agreement.
How did they explain that contradiction?
They mentioned a loss of communication with certain militant factions operating in that area, which raises a fundamental question for any such agreement, really.
Can the central leadership guarantee compliance down the line?
Exactly. If you broker peace with an entity, do they have full command and control over every affiliated group?
Yeah.
That distinction between stated policy and the reality on the ground seems crucial here.
And the immediate consequence of this breach and the subsequent Israeli response was a deepening of the humanitarian crisis.
Absolutely. Aid delivery, which sources suggest was already falling short of the required levels, faced severe disruption. It's easy to get lost in the high-level diplomacy, but the impact on ordinary people was and is devastating.
And there are other worrying reports emerging from Gaza itself around this time.
Yes, concerning internal stability. Reports, though sometimes difficult to verify independently, highlighted concerns about Hamas allegedly carrying out executions within Gaza, and also, adding to the anguish, delays in returning the bodies of deceased hostages.
A very grim picture.
And compounded by warnings from organizations like the World Health Organization pointing towards the risk of a prolonged public health crisis. Devastated infrastructure, critical shortages of essentials. It creates a dangerous situation.
So that sets the stage. The agreement made, then broken, the immediate consequences clear. Let's turn now to the decision makers. Who's pulling the levers, what are their perspectives, and what are the wider international implications?
Starting with the U.S. leadership, President Trump and Vice President Vance. We see a sort of two-pronged approach in the sources. President Trump publicly maintained that the ceasefire was, technically, still in effect. Diplomatic cover, perhaps.
But paired with a warning.
A very direct warning, yes. Issued via social media, stating that failure by Hamas to comply would lead to a swift and severe end. Meanwhile, Vice President J.D. Vance traveled to Israel.
What was his message?
Urging patience, particularly on the very sensitive issue of returning the deceased hostages, but also reinforcing the need for compliance. And crucially, the U.S. made it very clear. No American troops would be deployed to Gaza as part of any stabilization effort. Commitment, yes, but not boots on the ground.
Okay. What about the Israeli government's position under Prime Minister Netanyahu?
They're navigating a difficult path, balancing the diplomatic commitments they've made with intense domestic pressure. The primary focus, according to the sources, remains on security. Dismantling Hamas's military capacity and preventing rearmament is paramount.
A tough balancing act. And regionally, who are the key players trying to manage this?
Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey received praise in many reports for their mediation roles. They are seen as crucial stabilizing influences, working actively behind the scenes to de-escalate. Egypt, in particular, given its location, is positioned to coordinate the next phase, that transitional governing council for Gaza.
This complex diplomatic landscape naturally leads to discussions about concrete next steps, proposed courses of action. What are we seeing there?
Well, the idea of an international stabilization force has gained traction. Australia, for instance, is reportedly preparing contingency plans for potential troop deployment.
And others have offered support?
Yes. Indonesia publicly offered troops, contingent on a UN mandate. Turkey and Azerbaijan also expressed willingness to contribute forces. However, there's a complication.
Which is?
Israel has indicated opposition to certain countries participating, specifically mentioning Turkey. So even assembling such a force involves navigating political sensitivities.
Understood. And beyond security forces, what about the reconstruction effort itself?
Cyprus has stepped forward with a detailed 6-step plan for Gaza. It focuses on the immediate, practical needs, debris removal, rebuilding essential infrastructure. It's designed to work alongside the broader U.S. peace plan, tackling the physical devastation while the political track continues.
Now, this is where analyzing the sources themselves becomes particularly illuminating. The way different outlets frame these events reveals a fundamental tension, doesn't it?
It really does. You see a clear split. On one side, sources often described as pro-Trump or focused on transactional diplomacy outlets like Town Hall or the Washington Examiner. They tend to portray the initial agreement as a major historic achievement, a legacy-defining moment for the U.S. president.
Viewing it primarily as a successful negotiation.
Essentially, yes. A deal struck through leverage and political will. On the other side, you have sources that are perhaps more skeptical or focused on the ideological dimensions, outlets like First Post or Iram News.
And their perspective.
Their critique tends to be that the plan, being so closely tied to specific personalities, perhaps lacked the depth needed to address the underlying issue, Hamas's ideological influence within Gaza. They question whether a deal alone can dismantle that deep-seated resistance.
So the core tension revealed by the sources is this. Can peace be secured purely through political deals and exchanges, or does it require a more fundamental shift, addressing the ideology driving the conflict?
That's the crux of it. And this tension isn't just in the newsrooms, it's reflected in public sentiment as well. Our analysis of social media, specifically X, around these events is quite revealing.
What did that analysis show?
Overwhelmingly, the sentiment linked to keywords around the conflict is negative, often in the range of 60 to 80% negative.
What's driving that negativity?
Several things seem to be converging. General conflict fatigue, certainly. Urgent concerns about the humanitarian situation, very visible under the hashtag Gaza. And widespread fear of a wider regional war, often tagged with hashtag military.
But is it all negative? Is there any common ground?
There is, but it's complex. Discussions around the main actors, hashtag Israel and hashtag Hamas, remain highly polarized, as you might expect. However, the strongest area of broad agreement, the most common viewpoint cutting across divides, is the simple desire for hashtag peace.
How strong is that sentiment?
For the hashtag peace hashtag specifically, we saw around 50% positive sentiment. People express hope, but it's often tinged with deep skepticism, referencing past failed negotiations. There's a palpable sense that people are exhausted by the conflict and desperately want a resolution, even if they doubt it's achievable.
All right, so pulling all these threads together, the fragile ceasefire, the diplomatic efforts, the differing perspectives, the public mood, what should we be watching for in the immediate future? What are the most likely developments?
Based on the intelligence brief, we can identify three key areas to monitor closely. First, expect continued intensive U.S. diplomatic engagement. Envoys like Witkoff, Kushner, perhaps Vice President Vance, again, their focus will be on shoring up compliance with the existing agreement and trying to push forward talks on disarmament.
That makes sense. Second,
keep an eye on the calendar toward the end of 2025. That's the target timeframe for actually getting that International Peace Council up and running. Tied to that will be the coordination of international aid efforts, possibly including that reconstruction plan proposed by Cyprus.
and the third, perhaps most critical point.
Monitoring Hamas's compliance on the ground. This seems to be the flashpoint. If breaches like the Rafah incident continue, the potential for renewed, large-scale Israeli military action is very real. Both U.S. and Israeli officials have signaled, quite clearly, that their patience on this is limited.
So the situation remains balanced on a knife edge.
Very much so. And it's this kind of nuanced picture drawn from diverse sources that Stylo News aims to provide. It works by aggregating information from hundreds of traditional news outlets, alongside social media channels like X, and then normalizing that raw data into structured, actionable intelligence.
And for you, our listeners, if you want access to this kind of AI-powered news analysis on demand, you can subscribe to Stylo News. The executive monthly plan is available for $19.99 per month. That includes key event tracking, analysis of decision-maker perspectives, and even source bias assessments. Just visit www.stylernews.com to learn more and subscribe.
Thank you again for joining us for this deep dive into a very complex and rapidly evolving situation.
And as we leave you, perhaps a thought to consider. Given that this peace effort was largely driven by external powers, and the initial agreement seemingly struggled to overcome entrenched ideological resistance, could it be that the ultimate measure of success won't be the diplomatic agreements themselves, but whether the populations involved, weary of conflict, simply refuse to countenance further violence, irrespective of leadership directives? Something to ponder.
Please do follow Stylo News on your preferred social media platforms for ongoing intelligence and insights.
Until next time, goodbye.